Hello, everyone out there. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on the West Coast and this evening on the East Coast. I cannot tell you how much I wish I was actually with all of you and with Anna right now, but we're so happy to have you here. And we want you all to know that you can put your questions in the right-hand rail comment area, and we will be getting to those later. So please, if you have questions for Ms. Smith, please put them there and we'll get to them. Thank you so much for being here, Anna. It's so nice to see you.
Great to see you again. Great to see you again.
It's interesting times, and so this question that I'm about to ask you has gotten very complicated in the last few months. How are you?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. That means I don't know the answer. What I've been saying for the last couple of months is I'm hanging in there. Now, more often I say, wow, it's a very, very tough time. It's a very tough time for our country.
It is a very tough time for our country. And last week you were asked to do a guest sermon at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And I would urge everyone out there to take a look at this. It's only 8 minutes long. It's very moving. It's very thoughtful. It quotes from a letter from the Birmingham jail. But you say something near the end that really piqued my interest. Because we seem to keep going through this cycle, you ask, what will be different about this time? What will make it go from us just shaking our heads to action? Is this the beginning of the drama here, or is it the denouement? Is it, what can you do, essentially, you are asking, and hopefully people are finding out what they can do and are doing it. But I'm curious how you feel about this moment, because we have been here before and you have documented a moment like this before. Does it feel different to you?
I think it's different. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I just want to quickly thank Susan Engel at the Y for doing this whole series, Confronting Hate. And she told me right before we started that I guess this is like my 13th or 14th time doing things with the Y. I used to do a lot of interviews for her back in the 90s. And so I just wanted to, raise a toast to Susan for everything that she does to create community around ideas. And that's something, she's doing something, right? She's creating a community around ideas with this umbrella idea of confronting hate. So I believe we can all do something. I do think this is different. I think it's different because of the worldwide vigor. I think it's different because of the diversity in the crowd. You were, I don't know, you may not have, how old were you during the LA uprising, riot, or revolution?
How old was I? I was about 23, but I was in Boston, so I did not experience it.
So, I mean, I wasn't in LA when it was happening. I went afterwards, but I think that this feels like a real sea or an ocean of concern and across race, across interests. So I do think it's different.
And so I also feel that way. I feel like, and I'm trying to figure out why. And I'm not sure if there is a way to put a finger on that, to quantify why it is different, to see it in Berlin and Auckland and in this country, literally all over the world, people coming out and speaking up, people making pledges that we would not have seen them make before. I mean, they did not make before, so they would not have made before. And I'm curious if you have any insight as to why it's different now. What is it about this moment?
Well, I mean, I'm not a sociologist. I would say, enough. This is the moment of enough. I think that the graphicness of the murder of George Floyd, I think how long Derek Chauvin had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, for us to see that was maybe even, and close up, the beating of Rodney King, which became, that's really one of the first times that we ever had something go around the world, the sort of video go around the world. George Holliday happened to be there with a camera and capture it. And then we saw images, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. But this was, I think, the fact that it was a close-up is one thing. And also that it's in a string, like a long, long list of names of people that we've seen, in particular since 2014. These deaths, these murders, these beatings. And I think it's just gotten to people. Probably the pandemic has something to do with it, that folks are worked up. Before this happened, I talked about most artists being on a tightrope that was both an existential tightrope and a career tightrope. What's going to happen? What's going to be our future? We don't know. So I think that being in this not knowingness, it puts us all in more than a state of doubt, which is very unsettling. So I'm sure that they're very smart sociologists who have lots of things that they can interpret about it. And also it's different movements coming together. There are people out there who probably are very involved in climate change. Not everybody out there is involved necessarily in police brutality. So I mean, there'll be many books written about it.
Yes, it's enough. I think that it's, as someone who's also not a sociologist, I also feel like it coming so soon after Ahmaud Arbery, and how upsetting that was, that this was just whatever the straw was, this was the straw, and then add in Breonna Taylor, and it just all became so much. And I think the pandemic part of actually maybe gives people a sort of to hell with it. Let's just get something done.
Right.
Let's get something done.
Can't do anything about the pandemic except what they tell you to do, stay inside. So a sense of real powerlessness. I think that's right.
It's something we feel like, even though we have not been able to control it for so long, that maybe it is something that we know how to fight. We know how to go outside and say something about it, even though it is to our detriment to actually do that. But I'm so interested. I rewatched Twilight recently, and hopefully all of you out there will watch all of Anna's work. But specific to this issue, Notes from the Field, which is streaming on HBO on demand now, and Twilight, which is actually free on PBS to stream that now, and you should absolutely watch it. But watching it again, there are so many moments that struck me, and one of them was this moment that I'm assuming it's a white talent agent talking about how they actually are starting to absorb some of the guilt, that they are saying that, do I feel bad about this situation? I'm worried about my nanny, I'm worried about my house, but these people have had this knee on their neck for several hundred years, and maybe I should feel bad about that. And I feel like that is a click that's happening now that wasn't happening on a wide scale nature then.
Well, don't you remember though, first of all, I don't think I would have had a career, honestly, if it hadn't been for the LA riots. I was in New York. The night of the riot was going to be the first night of my play, Fires in the Mirror, which was about riots in Brooklyn. And, like none of us were sure that, anybody would really care. My experience of race in this country is sort of, we go up and down in terms of whether we care about it, whether we want to talk about it, whether we're, folks are absorbing a little guilt or trying to do inequality. And so I remember very clearly at the Public Theater, the managing director coming in and telling me and the director, Christopher Ashley, sort of muscling up to say, this theater's closing down, right? Because they thought that New York might break open. And, we didn't care. We were, me and him and Candy Donnelly, the costume designer, we wanted to go up and see if there was going to be anything. But I have always felt that the reason I have a career is because people were so upset about the Los Angeles riots, and in a sort of a sense of, how can I make sense of this, that they came to the theater and they came to see a show which is about another racial explosion in America. So, it comes and goes. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, that talent agent is also the thing that makes him say, what leads him to say, I began to absorb a little guilt, which is also, you'll see this coming in a minute. What's different about this time is that for him to watch people, quote unquote, burning down their own neighborhoods was very sobering to him. He couldn't understand why you would do that. And of course, that's what people thought how this was started, but it wasn't burning down your own neighborhoods. There was like, why did they get to Beverly Hills? Well, this time apparently they did. I know in Soho, not so far from me, folks were in Gucci stores and all of that kind of stuff. I'm certainly not condoning it, but that's also very different than 1992.
Yes. And actually, you know what? Let me back up for a second to talk about, I think that we often talk about these things. Obviously, they're very personal for us. It's very personal for you. It's personal for the entire Black community on some level. But what is your experience of racism in this country, as opposed to transposing other people's experience?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the South, really. I mean, Baltimore's on the Mason-Dixon line, but it's really a Southern city. And I grew up in de facto segregation. And so, in fact, I would say that the work that I do in the theater, which is, going places I don't belong, performing people who are very different than me, I say I chase that which is not me, is my healing process of having grown up in an environment where I was told, you don't belong here, you don't belong here, you don't belong here, you can't go there, you can't go there. And so that was my launch into it. And then, going to college when they were, looking for nice Negro girls like Anna and being in an environment of, like only 7 Black girls kind of thing. So it's always been a part of my reality. It is the reality upon which I live and breathe. What about you?
Well, I grew up in an all-white suburb right outside of Boston. Everybody can pull their comments about Boston. And we had a system in Boston where there were students that were bused in, famously, from the city. But I lived in the town. And there were, I think, 4 of us total. And so I had a very the Black kids from the city thought I was a sellout just for living in the town and having friends that were in the town. And the white kids, wrote nasty things on my locker. So it was a weird dual existence. There were a lot of lovely people there that were very kind to me. I had friends and a nice childhood, but there was a lot of racism. And I mean, and one of the things that I often say about like Black people from all different backgrounds, no matter where you're from, the one thing we have in common is racism. No matter where you're from, somebody's done something terrible to you, probably, and the scale depends on, your luck, more or less. But I'm interested now to hear that experience is essentially what drove you to examine these issues, because you continue to go back to in Notes from the Field, in the aftermath of Freddie Gray, and Twilight in the aftermath of LA. Justice and loss is something that you once said to me, that these are the things that are interesting to you. And I'm wondering, on sort of a personal psychic level, is there a toll for that, of taking this on and taking it apart and putting it back together again in a way to help other people understand?
Well, I mean, maybe now we should say something about art. This is a skill set that I've developed over a long time. Acting is actually being somebody who you are not. One of the skill sets is developing an emotional capacity. So as an artist, the reason I decided, it wasn't really specifically about race. It was just on the road to search for American character. I just wanted to use my tape recorder then, and now I can have a tape recorder to get close to strangers quickly. The great photographer, Mary Ellen Mark, talks about the camera gives her the necessary distance to get close to strangers. So I'm always trying to close that gap. I'm always trying to close the gap of myself being alienated from the other. And the further I have to go for the most unlikely person, the better. And, I'm supposed to be able to carry emotions. And, when my career started out, I was lucky if I had a job at all. And it was some little teeny tiny thing that I did on a soap opera or maybe a play. And I didn't really get a workout. So the other thing I was doing in designing this was giving myself an opportunity to have an intellectual and emotional workout. But, along these lines, I just want to read you something that, there's a great woman in the theater, and if folks may not know this, it's one reason I want to read it. Kristen Linklater, who trained many people, who then trained people. Her technique of voice, just a very extraordinary human being. And she passed. We've lost her recently. And a friend of mine sent me this as a text. My friend writes, "Of use today," and this is a quote from Kristen Linklater: "The purpose of growing as a human being must be to look at and listen to the whole human condition with increased understanding and compassion. And in the case of the artist, to shed an ever brighter light on the causes of humanity's more egregious errors." And that's from her book, Thoughts on Theater Therapy and the Art of Voice.
Mm.
So, just like a soldier is trained to fight, just like a football player is trained to run down the field, just like a soccer player is trained to do something, just like a dancer is trained to stand on point. And I've worked with the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. I know that's not always fun. We're trained to hold very large emotions.
And so I'm curious about I'm curious about a lot of things, but I'm curious about sort of the idea of you go in as an artist, we were talking yesterday, sort of in the aftermath, to talk to people, to assemble. And do you know what you're looking for when you do this? When you go to talk to people, or is it something that assembles itself as you do these 250, 300 interviews for these massive projects?
Well, I don't know, and that's why I'm doing it. I don't know. So I'm doing it because it's look, one of the things that Toni Morris and Susan, reminded me, I didn't need to be reminded, I'll never forget it as long as I live, interviewing Toni Morrison at the 92nd Street Y. And I remember it's back in the 90s that she said she knows she's ready to write when she's fretting about something.
Mm.
So, I mean, I start with this, like a big question, like, I don't understand this, or what happened here? And actually that's often my first question. It's like, what happened? Because nobody thinks the same thing happened.
Right.
And that becomes a sort of dramaturgy of what I'm doing. So I don't know. And I never have a theme or an idea or a conclusion. I mean, what's the point of going out there if I had all that?
Right. And what happened here is such a good question, because everybody actually thinks they know in almost every situation that they do know what happened, but almost no one actually does. But one thing we do know is that there is a pattern to what is happening here. If the details of each situation are slightly modified, the system behind it is the same. The knee is the same knee as it was 200, 300 years ago. And so I think that's why people think they know what happened. But I'm curious, in a situation like this, because you have gone to this place multiple times, does it occur to you, whenever what the end of this is, not that it has a defined boundary, that you will go and talk to people? Does that?
I don't know. To do a project is an enormous commitment. It's expensive. So I don't know. It's certainly very, 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 very interesting. And there's a lot of theater in it. I was thinking today about three moments of theater. One, I'm sure you paid attention, being the daughter of an Episcopalian priest, when the president walked across Lafayette Park and stood in front of St. John's with the Bible upside down. Now, I used to go to St. John's whenever I was in Washington to get my nerve up. Whenever I was performing on Fridays, I'd go. And there's a pew there, pew 11, with a plaque that says that Abraham Lincoln, every night during the Civil War, would come across Lafayette Park and pray alone, right? So I also think the president's very interested in Lincoln. So that's one piece of theater. And another piece of theater that could have happened and was disrupted was the president choosing to go to Tulsa on Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Right? And then the next one, which causes a big question for me, is on the day of the first, and that's in the sermon actually, on the day of the first of 3 funerals of George Floyd, Rand Paul was on the floor of the Senate,
yes,
requesting amendments to the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. And in this country, we went the entire 20th century and could not pass a bill. It started in 1900. And here they passed it, actually. And I called Kamala Harris and I said, did you know that was going to happen? No. She was in her office and had to run over there. And if you look at the footage, you can see she and Cory Booker are really passionate and upset about this. And so you begin to think that there are these plays that are being made and they are not random.
Yes.
That they're planting a certain flag on top of American history and the signs of tragedy in American history.
Yes. Well, I mean,
recovery and problematizing them by coming and standing in that frame.
yes. And I mean, it's so interesting when you talk about standing in that frame, because it is not, even things that are unintentional are not without purpose. And so we keep experiencing the world now even more than we normally do through this prism, right? Through this screen. And this is the prism through which this man came to us. And there is an understanding of how to manipulate this frame, right? And so I'm interested to hear that you think these things are not unintentional, and that if we can all just sit for a moment with the idea that it has taken 120 something years to pass an anti-lynching bill. So maybe, again, this is a moment that is different than it has been in the past.
I must tell you, too, that in 1996, I traveled on both the President Clinton's campaign, obviously Democrats, but I also traveled on Bob Dole's campaign. And I went to the Republican convention. The Republicans have an extraordinary sense of theater. That convention was designed within an inch of its life, much more so than the Democratic convention. So, I mean, I'm interested in that, of course.
And I'm curious, I don't know how many of you all, or if you, Anna, saw, Dave Chappelle recently released a free 30-minute sort of unrefined stand-up set, which wasn't exactly stand-up, but talking about these issues. And a point that he made, and that I wanted to bring up with you, and there's a difference between celebrity and art here. Let's make a distinction between celebrity and artist. That
sometimes it's the same.
Sometimes, but for the sake of this discussion, just for a moment, let us separate celebrity from art for a moment. That sort of people were calling him out saying, why isn't Dave Chappelle saying something about this? And his response essentially was like, I am getting out of the way of the people, the young people who are saying the thing. And I am happy to sit in the backseat and let them drive, because this is their moment, to the extent that young people always drive a moment like this, that we are all in it together. And this is the thing that we are truly all in together, that he wanted to be out of the way of that. And I'm curious, I'm not sure if you see yourself as a celebrity or not, but I'm curious your thought on that, about how necessary it is for someone who has fame to lend that fame to this moment.
Well, I'm certainly not a celebrity like Dave Chappelle or many of the people that I work with. I do this kind of little niche theater that some people know about, about it. And every once in a while I get to be on a show, but I want to say, first of all, I think I was riveted by 846, and in particular because he didn't have any of what I would call the official language. There are two people who really influenced me greatly, and they both lived to be almost 100. And one was Studs Terkel, the great journalist, Chicago journalist, and the other was a philosopher of education who I'm sure came to the Y all the time, Maxine Greene. And they both had this version of talking about the official language and how limited that language is. Now, we've heard a lot of that on television. That's why we hear some of the same words over and over and over again, right? And here's Dave Chappelle. He's pulling his pants legs up. He's all over the place, and he's not saying words we've heard anybody else say. He's not coming to any conclusions, and so I actually think I was very excited by it. I have an institute called the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue, and originally when it started at Harvard, it's now at NYU. The goal was to bring out work half made up, with the idea that not all the bells and whistles are there, but the idea that there's more opportunity for discussion, not about whether the work is good or not, but that you don't know it. I said this to you last night. I said, I know absolutely nothing. But I mean, you can't really come out and say that.
Right.
I'm plugging Notes in the Field, and I'm plugging, Twilight. I want people to watch it, right? So HBO and PBS think, she's a halfway decent artist. But I don't know anything about this. Yeah. And even during the pandemic, at the graduation of my students, our virtual graduation at NYU, and they said, well, the faculty, if you want to say something, you can. I said, don't be afraid to say, I have absolutely nothing to say.
Yeah.
Because in fact, it's more likely that a work of art or a drama is going to come from that sense of, I don't have the words for this. And so I have to create something else. Words are only representatives. They're not the official language. And yeah, so that's a long answer to what was a really good question.
Well, but now I want to switch from celebrity to art. And you touched on that just now, that there is a difference of the role of art here than the role of celebrity. Because if the role of celebrity is just to shine a light on a thing, which is not a small thing, that can be valuable. If Taylor Swift and Beyonce and whoever it might be is shining a light in a place you want a light shown, that is not insignificant. But then what is the role of the artist who wants to take this moment and transmogrify it into something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely essential that celebrities speak now, because they do have the public trust. We can't deny that. And I remember talking to Harry Belafonte about his role with Martin Luther King, and he, I remember him saying to me, you're going to pay me $100,000 to sing Jamaica Farewell? Fine. Write the check, give it to Martin Luther King. Right. So I think it's an extraordinary opportunity for celebrities to do, terrific things. I mean, I think those of us in the variety of arts that we're in, I mean, no artist is the same, but it does strike me that one thing we probably do is make a mess before we have any answers. Maybe we'll never have any answers, but that we are stimulated in some kind of a way by this scene that we see in front of us in the case of drama, and we would like to animate it, I would say. I don't know how a musician works. I don't know. But there will be great symphonies about this. Joel Thompson, a wonderful young composer, made a choral piece with an African-American composer, but in a classical sort of in the vocabulary of classical music, like the 7 last words. And it was some of those men that you've mentioned just now, there's 7 last words. And I think we'll have more things like that.
But do you feel like I like the idea of messy, because I think that's a message in general that is a good message to get out, because I hear from so many people about being fearful, that they don't know how to put a foot right, and they don't know what to say. And I like a fearlessness of an artist who is willing to be messy, which is essentially what Chappelle was doing. And that if people come to you asking you, or saying, I'm sort of frightened that I'm going to say the wrong thing, I want to support this moment, I want to be an ally, but I don't know exactly, not the people asking, what can I do? Because we can direct those people to the things that they can do, but the people who are afraid to have a conversation with a friend, with a family member. I guess the question is, is it okay to be messy? Because I feel like that's what I'm telling people. Like, nobody's perfect at this.
Look, when people tell me they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, I say, you can only say the wrong thing. I can only say the wrong thing, right? Because, I'm old. I know that from teaching. My ideas are not always welcome, right? Let's take something like defund the police. Well, I would say, well, do you really mean defund the police? Or do you mean reinvest, right? Well, I'm sure there's very conscious to call it defund the police rather than reinvest, which is basically what it's going to be, is reinvestments, right? So I'm with Chappelle. Let me know how I can be helpful. But I want to hear, and I want to struggle to understand. And I know I can only say the wrong thing.
And I want to ask you specifically about that, saying I want to hear, because so much of what we're saying to people right now is that we need to listen. And that's for everybody. Everybody needs to listen right now. We need to have a calmness in that listening. And it occurs to me that you are a professional listener on some level. You go out and you do these interviews, and you're not just listening, you're also absorbing in other ways in order to transform yourself, to get these moments and the essence of these ideas out. But you are primarily listening. And so I'm curious if you actually have advice on how to actively and listen well. How do you be a good listener?
Well, I mean, listening and hearing are not the same thing. I taught myself how to listen through the work that I do. And I mean, I was a listener as a child. I always loved this expression from one of Eudora Welty's essays. I can't remember which one, but she talked about growing up, and she wasn't allowed to come to Sunday dinner, when she was a little girl. And so she would sit outside in the hall while all of the family was having Sunday dinner. And this is an expression I love so much. And she says, and then my ears would open up like morning glories. And it so reminds me of my youth. I could see my grandfather's house, like with all those grown-ups in there, laughing and loud. And I loved how particularly my father's people had, they were loud, and, my mother's people were sort of kinder or something like that. But I mean, that's exactly the thing. So that's my nature. That's number one. But number two, I've taught myself how to listen, of course, specific to the work I'm doing. And the other thing is teaching, right? It's because it's like listening and watching in order to figure out, well, when can I say something and what should I say? With a real sense that you could, again, say the wrong thing and mess the whole thing up.
Yeah. And are there times that you've been messy and messed things up, but it's actually ended up paying a dividend for you creatively?
Oh my God, I'm sure there were. I mean, yeah. I mean, I can't think of anything specific. I probably am repressed it, but lots of times, lots. All artists talk about how failure is the best teacher. I mean, it's definitely true. And also, when I write a play, I come in with all this stuff. The poor directors, I come in with all this material. Usually the first read through is about 400 pages long. They have to endure all this because I perform it for them. And then they disagree. They have something to say about this doesn't work, that doesn't work, and blah, blah, blah. And then I go home and write another play. So that night for the next day. So I'm used to making a mess. I should be embarrassed. I guess I'm embarrassed. But I think the people I work with now, sort of anticipate this mess, and they just find points of entry into the conversation about just how messy it is and why.
Well, embarrassment could be a great motivator to get something right. I don't think that we should be embarrassed about being embarrassed. But in talking about this stuff, and like you said, coming to talk about the programs, have you sort of rewatched these works recently yourself?
I think I have not seen Twilight. Well, for one reason, Twilight would have been on stage right now with 5 actors at the Signature Theater. They're one of their playwrights in residence this year. They did Fires in the Mirror in the fall, so it's not on stage for obvious reasons. But the audition process of finding these 5 actors of different races who are going to play other than their own races was this process of hearing the language again and again and again, and being astonished at what people said to me and how beautiful it was. So I haven't watched the film in a while, but I've looked and I've listened to the language under a microscope very recently. And it's just powerful what people said.
And to be light just for a moment, like it takes 5 people to do something you just did all by yourself. That must be gratifying.
Well, I look at it as employment opportunity.
No, it's a good thing. And in this moment, sort of separate from the issue, the larger issue at hand now, I've been talking to a lot of actors, writers, directors. Are you finding this moment a moment of creativity? Not that you're writing something specific, or are you finding it, I don't want to engage with my creativity in this moment, or somewhere in between?
No. I mean, right now, I'm just trying to follow it. Who thought that Richard Brooks would be killed? And the way, when we saw the body cam footage, that everything starts out pretty calmly. Mm-hmm. And then before we know it, he's being shot. I have friends who are like, established Black men who are afraid to go running. They live in nice neighborhoods.
Well, I mean, I think that's a lie that the thing that I got followed by a cop the other night here in LA. Like I think that's part of the lie that we tell ourselves as a society, that this only happens to certain kinds of people, which is not true at all. And I think maybe part of the reckoning that we're having right now, and hopefully the momentum that it is going to carry with that. But I mean, I think Ken Burns told me once that Mark Twain said, I'm quoting Ken Burns, quoting Mark Twain, that history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And I feel like these echoes that we are having, this rhyming that we're having, that it's time for this song to be over. I just don't know how we stop singing. Like, how do we come to the end of this song? And I don't know. I certainly don't have the answer. I'm assuming you also don't have the answer.
Well, I mean, we don't. I mean, I think the Black tradition, and one of the people who I performed and will be performed in Twilight when it's finally on stage and who's in the movie is the late Jessie Norman. Yeah. And she talks about how, you know, Black people have a great tradition of singing ourselves, she says, through troubles, not out of them, but through them. So I don't see if, however the song, however long the song is, however long this opera is, I feel that we will keep singing. You know, I mean, I just watched Cheryl Eiffel on 60 Minutes, and you know, she said, you know, what history has taught her, and she's quite the historian about African American people, is that we do not give up, and I think that's absolutely right. And so as long as there's a song to sing, I think we're going to sing it.
I just want to start singing a new song, I guess. A happier song. I want an up-tempo pop song instead of a sad ballad. But speaking of sad ballads and things that are out there, and we are recommending some of your work to, and there are so many sort of recommendations happening right now. Is there work that speaks to you that you would recommend?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just going to think like historically of two things that come to mind, because, you know, I'm very haunted, as I've said on earlier last week publicly, you know, I'm very haunted by that image of George Floyd with the knee on his neck for so long. And it does recall to me lynchings. And, you know, I have, and I hope you will go if you haven't, to the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, that Brian Stevenson has put together. And, you know, I think it's something that's in the contemporary mind right now. So there are two works that I have been thinking about. And one is Jacob Lawrence's migration series. And one of the plates is actually a plate of a noose. It's not around the neck of the individual sitting beside it, but it's there in a very ominous way. And then the other is, of course, a famous song that Billie Holiday made, famous Strange Fruit, which I should say to white people who are worried I'm going to say the wrong thing, but that song is a collaboration between a Jewish man and Billie Holiday. And so there can be really lasting things in the American story if people will collaborate across lines and not assume that you don't have a voice because of what color you were born as. So those are two works that I've been listening to, looking at recently.
And just to throw in my own 2 cents, Passover, which is on Amazon Prime right now, which is a play that stars John Michael Hill now, of course. I'm forgetting the other guy's name, but he's excellent in it. It's on Amazon right now. It's two young men on a street corner in a Waiting for Godot type frame. They're homeless and they have a dream to Passover. And it's really moving and interesting. So that would be my recommendation. I see that we have some questions. And so we are going to ask a few questions from the audience. And Rebecca would like to know, Anna, what is keeping you hopeful, if you are in fact hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful. I'm a hopeaholic. I stole that expression from Gloria Steinem. Nobody has quite the way of words that she has. And also I learned from Cornel West that, you know, hope and optimism are different, that optimism kind of goes, you know what, let's go swimming. I mean, it's going to be okay. I could see the clouds lifting. Whereas hope, you look, and as Cornell says, you know, it doesn't look good at all. But you say, I'm going to make a leap of faith, basically, and go ahead anyway. So with hope is faith, or, you know, I love that expression, the blood-stained banner of struggle that I heard from my friend, the late James Cone, Black Liberation Theology. So I am hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. And it's interesting to me that people often ask artists, is there any hope? I haven't, you know, they'll ask that before they'll say, what can I do?
So that actually is super interesting to me. Why do you think that is? I have a theory, but why do you think that is?
What is your theory? I'm interested.
That people, and not to be rude, but that they're looking for a shortcut.
Looking for what?
For a shortcut. They just want to be hopeful without having to figure out why. If there is work to do in order to be hopeful. And I am including myself in that group. That is not an accusatory, like.
I mean, it could be like, it's no point in doing anything if it's not hope. I mean, we could say it's that way too. You know, that the gloom is just too great.
Yeah. Are there specific-
all great, the great activists, you know, all of them were hopeful people, even if they were telling a dark, dark story.
I mean, we have to have hope, because what's the alternative? I mean, hopelessness is not an attractive state of being. It's very despairing. But I guess she's asking, are there specific things that are keeping you hopeful, as opposed to sort of just the general idea of hopefulness?
Well, I mean, I think the magnitude of the problem is very interesting to me, right? And so I know that you know, it's like you were saying before we started, well, you know, even if it doesn't go well, I mean, after all, we're not curing cancer, right? And one of the things that's interesting about cancer as a disease is that it is so complex. In my play, Let Me Down Easy, which was about healthcare, I spent considerable amount of time at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, and they all had a lanyard that said, "Make cancer history." And they really understood that it was going to be a collaboration. They really, I mean, anybody in that knows and you go to a big place like MD Anderson, you see all these facets of it. And so, you know, I think what is, keeps me paying attention, maybe that's something to do with hope, is the magnitude of this problem. We say defund the police, but I know from writing notes from the field, the schools are disastrous, right? We treat our teachers terribly. We throw out kids as if they were rubbish. You know, look what we know about, you and I knew, but look how the country's coming to understand the social determinants of morbidity, as so many Black people are dying right now with the pandemic. So there are multiple opportunities. And the fact that many people are sitting up and saying, what can I do? It's the case that most likely in the silo of their profession, there's something they can do.
Well, and that's a point that you made in that sermon that I think is really interesting, that people need to sort of, it's the think global, act local. I mean, literally local. What can you do? What is in your skill set? What is in your purview? What is it that you're in charge of that you can actually do something, even if that's just, you know, helping a neighbor go get groceries because they are immunodeficient in some way. There's always something that you can do. And so I feel like if people get stuck on the idea that I am just one person, right? This is a problem that we have had, but like, this is what taking to the streets is about. We are not just one person, we are a body of people. And if we raise our voice together, but each one of those voices can be saying something in their own neighborhood.
That's
like,
right.
Something that they can be doing. And I feel like that's not that anybody else, but that's what's giving me hope. That people are doing what you suggest, that they're even in the smallest ways, every action adds up, like hopefully, but it is so, you talk about healthcare, you talk about racism, you talk about the police, you talk about education as you do in Notes from the Field. And it is so interconnected. And I feel like that's why people get hopeless. It's so many systems. How can we fight them all?
Or even reaching out. I was talking to Brian Stokes Mitchell last night, who's, you know, an extraordinary Broadway star. And, you know, he and some of the other Broadway celebrities are, you know, they reached out to Stacey Abrams and said, what should we focus on? And so it's also it's not only that you don't have to do it alone, that you can seek expertise to see how what you can offer could be of use.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Jacqueline would like to know, whose head would you like to get into because you don't understand them yet?
Donald Trump.
Okay, wow, that's a Godspeed on that journey into that head. And so you have no understanding of what's happening in his head, so you would like to get in.
I don't have an understanding what's happening in your head.
I feel
like yes, you know, I mean, I think, you know, as I mentioned, you know, my life has been about chasing that which is not me. in part to close this gap that I grew up with. There's such a dramatic gap in de facto segregation. Yeah, I mean, that's a person that I would, if it was to get inside of somebody's head. Yeah.
And not that, actually, this just reminds me, not that she's in his head, but have you seen Sarah Cooper's TikToks where she sort of lip syncs from?
They're fantastic.
And it's interesting to me, somebody was asking me about that the other day, and I'd love for your take on that, the value in that. What is the value in that? Because I believe that there is value.
It's just good. It's just good. I mean, she's a very charismatic performer. It's just good.
Yeah, I actually think that, as you talked about the LA riots, that this moment is going to be transformative for her in a way, and we're going to see really interesting stuff from her going forward. I hope so anyway. Okay, the next question comes from Angela. What questions should we be asking ourselves during this crucial time? Are there specific things that you think people should be thinking about?
What can I do? What can I do? And you know, it's also like to cross that aisle and, you know, ask questions like, you know, I don't know, of the people who use the word pain or hurt, which is, we hear those words a lot right now. What hurts? When you say you're in pain, when you say the community's in pain, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm. All right. Susan would like to know, how can the country come together? Is real change dependent on politics? How can we create more dialogue between white and Black people nationwide? Is integration possible? I think that's an interesting way to ask that question. Is integration possible?
Well, I mean, I am seeing more togetherness than I've seen previously. And you know, that's a question you could ask a lot of people, because there'd be some people who would say, you can only come together on my terms, right? I mean, I don't know. Is it about coming together, or is it about actively seeking the promise of America, which is towards a more perfect union? Is it about actively seeking that, not quite getting there, but making progress while you seek it? Maybe coming together is too conclusive. Maybe that's not what's going to happen.
Well, and it also sounds like an endpoint that we are distant from. And I'm also curious if it is it the point? I guess to not get nerdy about it, but it's like, what's the definition of together? And I don't know. People are saying that we are so divided right now, and I wonder if we're actually any more divided than we were before. It just is we're more visibly divided, that we're being louder and we're being filmed, and so the division is obvious. And I'm not sure, and I don't know.
Well, if we have police officers walking off the job, I don't know if that's ever. I mean, you know that it happened in LA, right? Because Daryl Gates held him back. And I want to tell you, Daryl Gates, who was a person I performed in that show in Twilight, when that was all over, he came over to me in a restaurant one time. And he said, that was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life.
Wow, really?
Said it cost me my marriage, cost me my job. He was very remorseful, actually.
That's interesting, because there is a moment in Twilight where you're at a restaurant, I think, or at a table with a sort of a wide swath of people that had a stake.
We're at the dinner table of the man who fired him, Police Commissioner Stanley Scheinbaum. We're at that table, and Daryl Gates was willing to come to sit at that table.
And it's interesting because there is a moment that you say, which is the thing that I hope you keep saying and that everyone keeps saying, that, and it is such an echo of what is happening, that everybody is yelling at each other, essentially, sort of whatever their constituent complaint is. And you say, I think we all need to do some listening. And there's so much in this piece that reminds me both sort of gratifyingly and sadly of this moment now, of the things that we're chanting, of the names that we're saying, of the things that we're saying to each other. And I'm curious, as sort of timely as that is, this is like a weird way to ask you this question. I apologize, I'm being awkward about it, but is there anything about that makes you sad?
Makes me sad?
That you can watch this piece and feel like it is what's happening right now, that a lot of...
I'm very sad about it. I'm very sad. And by the way, I don't think everybody should be listening. You know, there are people who need to be doing a lot of talking, a lot of, you know, that's what I know how to do. But I'm not saying across the board that at all.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point, though. Who do you think should not be listening?
No, I mean, it's you do what you do best is all I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But, you know, of course, you know, the Los Angeles riots were 30 years after another riot in LA, which was based on police brutality. So we go from that to LA, and now here we are. I haven't counted the years, but how many years is it? 25 years or something?
Yeah. It's just, again, history rhyming. We have a question from Maureen, who says, great talk. Thanks, Maureen. Years ago, I think you said that Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence included the vaccine for the disease/sin of slavery/racism. Do you see that vaccine in this moment?
Well, Maureen has a good memory, except that what she's actually talking about is Ken Burns, who I ran into on the staircase in a small hotel in Paris. I said, can I interview you? And we sat right down and we had an interview. So Ken Burns in my play House Arrest, I'm playing Ken Burns, saying that Thomas Jefferson gave us both the poison and the salve, right? That, you know, he was a complicated man in every way. And so what is the vaccine at this moment? I think that is really an excellent question, and, you know, a sort of really intriguing metaphor, given the fact that we are looking for a real vaccine right now because of the pandemic. I don't have an answer to that question, but I think that's a question that Maureen should pursue.
All right, Maureen, you have your homework to do. I like that. Someone who did not share their name asked, what propels your faith?
Okay, you're going to have to answer that too, Sarah.
Well, I'm not sure I have any, so it would be a short answer.
People. I mean, I love people and I believe in people. I'm very disturbed by the darkness of some people, but I think the simple answer for me is people, the mystery, the inconclusiveness of people, even when they die. Yeah, I would say, I would say that. And also doubt. I always start every class I teach with confidence is overrated, give doubt a try. And you think about doubt, you know, puts you in this really interesting position of query.
Yeah.
I'm a very, very doubtful person. And maybe I have to have faith in order to withstand my profound doubt.
Yes, I think that is, and I'm going to steal your answer and say that the faith that I do have, which is actually quite robust, not in a divine way, but in a sort of, in a secular way, is in the good that I've seen people do. One of the things in watching Twilight, I'll get a little misty about it, was the 4 people who came to the aid of Reginald Denny.
Amazing.
African-American, who one drove the truck, one directed traffic, one got traffic out of the way, one cradled him. I mean, there's no excuse for what happened to that man, but the people who swarmed to care for him, that's the kind of thing that gives me hope.
Well, we're seeing that happening now. You know, the rugby player who ran to save the truck driver on that highway near Minneapolis when he was going to get slaughtered. Or today I came across something in England of a person on the opposite side, like a white person on the opposite side, creating havoc, who didn't get out fast enough, and he would have been trampled. And a trainer picked him up and carried him like a fireman away from it. That was his immediate thing. It's like, this is not what we do. I can't see this man trampled. So, yeah.
Right, exactly. And the gentleman who protected the police in one city where there was a rally happening, yeah, that's the kind of thing that gives me faith. That there's still so much, it really is such a small percentage of us that are doing the damage on any level in any way, whether it's political or personal. It's not the most of us. The best of us are still out there. I don't know if you have an answer for this one. This is also a anonymous person who would like to know who you think Joe Biden should pick as his VP.
I'm not saying.
Keeping it to yourself. I think that's wise. I'm certainly not saying. From Mimi would like to know, in Twilight, how did you manage to embody a brutal police officer? Did you have dissonance, compassion, anger?
Well, I guess the brutal police officer was Daryl Gates, because the other police officer hadn't actually, but I want to say something about him. He hadn't actually been out there doing anything. Well, Brasenio, during the second trial, I think with Brasenio, he was so beaten and broken by the whole process, by the time I met him, that it's a different type of an individual. But there is a police officer in Twilight who shows me about the baton training. And he rushed over to the theater. He said, I'll come over there. I want to show you, right? He just had this great desire to correct something in our misconception. But the thing I want to say about that police officer is that he was showing me the reason it took so long to subdue Rodney King and why he got so badly hurt. And the argument was that the chokehold had been taken away from them in the 1980s. And that if they still had the chokehold, they would have never beat him so bad. Well, now they're talking about getting rid of the chokehold. I don't think it's actually, I don't know, I'm not a police officer, but it seems to me this use of force thing is less about the type of force and more about, just don't do it like that, or don't make us believe that there's anything reasonable about that force, right?
Right.
But it does haunt me that they're saying, well, we're going to get rid of the chokehold, and look what happened when that happened before.
Yes, and the distinction he makes is just so chilling that 17, 20 people have died between 1975 and 82 from this thing, so they took this method away from us. But if they hadn't done it, we wouldn't have to beat him this way. And it's an interesting train of thought. We have a question from Sandra. I use your theatrical work as required viewing for discussion and reflection in social work courses. That's great, Sandra. If you were in my classroom, what message would you convey to rising community social workers?
Man, I think thank you so much for doing that. That's really, much of the point of my work is for it to be of use outside of the realm of the theater and arts. I would just say the message I would give is, I'm so grateful for your willingness to walk beside the people who are data for many of us, to be with them even when they fail, which is what really good social workers do. Thank you for walking. Thank you for being in the company.
Thank you, Sandra. And we are just about out of time, so this would be our last question, and it's a good one to end on. Michael would like to know who inspires you and what gives you strength.
Oh, so many people. I talked about Billie Holiday and Jacob Lawrence, but my students, my mentees, I only have a couple of those. My students did some wonderful work last term, some of it pertinent to this. It's all around us. The inspiration is everywhere, is what I would say.
We just need to be open to it. And I just have to share with you, multiple people said to me, a lot of people are rewatching The West Wing right now, Anna, and loving you. And so they wanted to say thank you for your participation in that project. And I want to thank everybody who joined us tonight, question or no, who just came along for the conversation and the ride. And I want to thank Anna so much for being here, and thank the 92Y for having us. Go forth, do good, be kind to each other, and wash your hands. Thanks, y'all.
Don't touch your face.
Right, and don't touch your face. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much.